Hi, scholars. Walter Bowne here. Okay, we're introducing today the literary narrative. And what I have before you is a text from Shakespeare in America, which is a series of essays about Shakespeare's influence in America. And the one essay here by famous novelist, current novelist Jane Smiley, is her memoir, or really it's an essay about her literary influences and how Shakespeare influenced her. So let's just go through some of the text to show you how you might be able to incorporate some of her stylistic renderings, rhetorical strategies, structural, topical sentences, that kind of stuff. All right. So let's start with perhaps every writer is modeled by seminal text. All right, that's her topic sentence. Perhaps every writer is modeled by seminal text. Seminal text means those that stand out, right? So think about the text in your life that have stood out for you. What if you look back on your youth, on your development as a scholar? You're sitting here in AP English for a reason. What stands out for you, right? So think about that for a second. You might want to jot down 3 texts off the top of your head. Harry Potter could be one. That's generally one. But it can be an early reader. It can be whatever text. It could be your dad's New Yorker magazine or your mom's Atlantic Monthly, whatever it is. Right. Let's continue with the piece. I certainly was. Right. So there she uses a dramatically short sentence because there's going to be a longer sentence coming. And she wants to vary her sentence structure. She also wants to use the ethos, I certainly was, modeled by seminal text. So she starts with a passive sentence and then follows it up with an active sentence, right? For me, the 3 books that formed my future writing were 2 novels, Giants in the Earth by A.O.E. Rollag, I've never heard of that person, which I read in 8th grade, and David Copperfield, which I read in 9th grade, and a science book, The Web of Life, which introduced me to the field of ecology, also in 8th grade. Each of these books, in its way, seemed entirely true to me at the time I read it. They were almost the first books I read that weren't series books for children. Though I remember very little of the style of the Rollag novel, I remember that the hardships endured by Pierre Hansa and his family and the tragic outcome on their immigration to Minnesota seemed absolutely right as a picture of the way the world worked. There's the M dash, like the Westward Ho stories I was always seeing on TV, but more honest in counting the costs. Notice the alliteration of Western settlement and predicting the probable outcome would be terrifying rather than happy. Right? And here I have a little note. I have these little post-it notes. She mines here memories. I remember the hardships, these things that I saw on TV that reminded me of Westerns where people east would go west. Right? I do remember the style of David Copperfield. Notice she has 3 signposts in the intro. All right, this Giants of the Earth, David Copperfield, Web of Life. So we know we're going to get these 3 in that order. I do remember the style of David Copperfield. Who doesn't? All right, uses a rhetorical question. Who doesn't remember the style? Now, of course, she's talking to literary people. It speaks to me. It speaks to other people, perhaps English majors and professors and people who would read this type of book. And then she says, I was enchanted by it. But the real lesson of Dickens was the complexity and the liveliness of the novel as a form. In David's novel, David is still the center of the swirl of other characters, unaccountable for me at 14. And the Web of Life reinforced that sense that I had of the variousness and interconnectedness of land, animals, plants, people, town and countryside, prairie, and civilization. Notice she uses a numeratio there, a list of things with commas. From these readings, I came to Shakespeare. And again, she wants to come to Shakespeare at the end because that's the focus, how she used Shakespeare in her reading of Shakespeare to write the great novel, 1,000 Acres, which I read. I encourage you guys to also read it, who fit right in. Each year, we read a Shakespeare play. Each year, we read a Shakespeare play, starting with Twelfth Night in 7th grade, Midsummer Night's Dream, Julius Caesar, As You Like It, Hamlet, and King Lear. What I liked at first, the treasury of names in the list of the dramatis personae, and what I kept liking was the action and liveliness of the stage. So I'm not going to continue reading this to you. You can see my little post-it notes here. Here she discusses what she found disappointing about Shakespeare and how she reworked Shakespeare in her own writing and retells the story of King Lear. His work was all verbal. She grew up in the Midwest where it was all narrative. So each writer finds the form that best suits his or her personality. So for some of you, you guys are much more adaptable to poetry. I don't write poetry personally. I do, it's not that good. My form tends to be the creative nonfiction, things that have been published. There's been more creative nonfiction, short essay. I like the narrative. I've also done, let's say, drama, but for each writer, it seems to be, Poe wrote the short story. So it depends on what form you're more comfortable in. And for her, it was the narrative form, the long form, right? And then I go down here and she talks about other influences. She shifts gears in this paragraph to talk about writing. Here is another part of the authorial machine, the assimilation of the writer to a form. So writers, she says, assimilate to a specific genre or to a form of writing. Then she comes down here and talks about one of her heroes, Virginia Woolf, a woman who needs to go to a room, lock the door, and her famous piece called A Room of One's Own. So here we can see how a writer is looking at her literary life, explaining to the reader how she developed as a writer and a reader. And that's exactly what you guys are doing. You're going to be looking at your life from birth to now and seeing what stands out, what influenced you, why did you respond to this book and that book. Maybe there was a book in class that everyone loved, but you didn't like it, and you have to explain why you didn't like it, why it didn't speak to you, what works did speak to you, what family members modeled writing for you, what maybe aunt was a writer or whatever. Everyone has a different life. You all got here, many different paths to get to AP English. So as you think about this story that you're writing, and I am calling it a story because you're sharing a story about your life, what stands out? How did you become the writer and the reader that you are today? And perhaps where you think you're going from here, right? I'll see you in class. Actually, you're probably listening to this in class, or this might be homework. All right, take care. Bye-bye.